What can we do about short-termism? It's almost a motherhood and apple pie issue. Everyone agrees that there's too much short-termism in the way that markets operate and in the way that companies are managed. But what exactly can we do about it? Well, this week there was a mammoth gathering here in Manhattan known as the Long-Term Value Summit, convened by McKinsey, by BlackRock and by the Canadian Public Pension Plan Investment Board. The idea was to bring asset managers together to discuss how they can be more long-term. Now, I asked Mark Weissman of the CPPIB if this doesn't really come down to defining the returns we make differently.
No, I don't think it's about defining returns more broadly, but it's about defining returns over the right time frame. At the end of the day, most savers' interest is very long terms, but something happens from that money that you've put aside. By the time it works its way through asset managers and through to corporations, the decisions that are being making at the end of the day are very short-term in nature. What you want as an investor, as a saver, is the best long-term value at the end of the cycle in which you're investing for. A quarter that's probably defined in something more like 25 years.
So there's the problem, and it's one that many agree on. Somehow or other, in the mix of all the financial institutions, a long-term focus becomes a short-term one. Here is another of Canada's most powerful pension fund managers, Michael Sabier of Quebec's Caisse de dépôt.
It is about reconnecting to the real economy. Let's take a step back. What's happened over the last 30 or 40 years? The financial sector in some ways has become an entity in and of itself. It's become disconnected in some important ways from the real economy. But what's the real role of a financial sector in an economy like ours? It's really to facilitate the growth and the development of the real economy, but we've lost that idea. Now, in the investment area, how does that manifest itself? Well, it manifests itself in trading that masquerades as investment. Because today, people buy companies, but they treat them like commodities. We need to think and act like owners. And owners are builders. So long-term investing is about building companies, it's about building infrastructure, it's about building enduring buildings and cities. It's about building, it's a mindset.
So, what about solutions? They really rest with the long-term investors themselves, big public pension plans and sovereign wealth funds, and a breakdown in the tendency for the different parts of the value chain, CEOs, boards, fund managers and asset owners, to split up into their own separate silos.
I think this silo issue is one where we're trying to drive deeper and deeper. What should a pension fund do, or a sovereign wealth fund do, or an institutional investor, not recognizing that they're also interacting with the asset managers. Maybe they're incentivizing them on a very short-term basis. They're paying them cash, not on a long-term basis. And then you have, because they hear that from the CEO saying, yeah, you say all those great long-term, you're long-term, but you're incentivizing your asset managers on a very short-term basis. So that's not what we're hearing when it comes down the chain.
Well, I think what's happened is that there is an agency issue, and this was actually identified by Michael Jensen way back in 1989 when he wrote in the Harvard Business Review about the eclipse of the public corporation. And the reality is there's nothing wrong fundamentally about the concept of a public corporation. But there is something wrong today about how our public corporations are governed. Public corporations are fantastic in that they allow companies to easily access capital, and they allow investors to be highly diversified. However, investors have to act like owners, and companies have to pay more attention to those long-term interests of the shareholders, not sort of that marginal shareholder or that marginal analyst who's really going to spend all of his or her attention on the last 90 days' performance.
There's also a sense that these agency issues have become a threat to capitalism itself.
Capitalism has become more narrow over the last 30 years, since about 1980 in particular. It's just the shareholder, and there's actually a broader set of stakeholders that need to be taken into account. It's not a trade-off, stakeholders, shareholders. And capitalism, though, has become very much more short-term and narrow, but it's also become less owner-operated. We talked about this, the chain, the dispersion. So the capitalist system is not working very effectively right now. It needs to be modernized. It has been in the past. I think we've gone through at least 3 or 4 modernizations, and I think we're in for another one.
And there's a sense of urgency. Capitalism, and particularly long-term investors, have to put its own house in order, or otherwise it will have a new order imposed on it.
I think it is a responsibility on us, and I think that we have a unique opportunity to try and put pressure on the system. And we're not doing this just because we think it's the right thing to do. We're actually doing it because we think it will lead to better outcomes, better financial outcomes for, in our case, the 18 million contributors and beneficiaries to the fund that we manage.
What I worry about is if we don't all collectively work on trying to improve it and modernize it, it will get fixed for us. And I don't think that outcome is going to be a very nice one, because this system, I think, is the best out there, as imperfect as it is.
Perhaps it's best to paraphrase Winston Churchill. He once said that democracy was the worst way to run a country that had ever been devised, apart from all the others that had ever been tried. You could probably say much the same about capitalism and running the economy. Now, it's very impressive that so many long-term investors, so many big capitalists share a sense of urgency and have at least come together to talk practically about it. Now, the onus is on them to deliver some results.